Hello, and welcome to the Crisis Point podcast. I'm Eric Sammons, the editor-in-chief of Crisis Magazine. And before I forget, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and like this video so more people, or audio, depending on how you're consuming it, so more people can find out about it. I'm very excited today because our guest is Leila Lawler, who just wrote an article for Crisis Magazine, and she's written a lot more than that in her time. And she is a wife, mother, and grandmother. She is the author of the upcoming 3-volume work, the Summa Domestica, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and God Has No Grandchildren. And she's the co-author of the Little Oratory, A Beginner's Guide to Praying in the Home. She resides in Central Massachusetts. But most importantly, I'm going to reveal something I just discovered, which is I am speaking to the person who's responsible for the name of Crisis Magazine, which I just found out last week. So tell the story, Leila. How did that happen?
Well, I don't know if everyone is aware that Crisis Magazine was started by Ralph McInerney and Michael Novak, and and it was called Catholicism in Crisis. And they hired my husband to be editor. This was back in the early 80s or 85, I think. And when he got there, they had a discussion. We don't think it should be called Catholicism in Crisis. That sounds a little negative. We need a better name. What could it be called? And honestly, like I listened for a week to them talking about, I mean, I was a young mom. I had my little babies and I was like listening to them talk about it needs to have a different name. And finally I just said, well, because I think that, I like drama. I think the magazine should be called Catholicism in Crisis, but I think they thought also was a mouthful. So finally I just said, how about Crisis? Just call it Crisis. And that's what they decided on. And I think it's funny because I don't think it made it less dramatic. But the other funny little footnote is that happens to be or to have been the name of the publication of the NAACP.
Yes.
And so for a little while, there was a little, maybe legal hassle over whether, and finally, I think Ralph McInerney said, I don't think we're going to be confused with the publication of the NAACP. So we're just going to go ahead and call it Crisis.
Yeah, and it's funny because I actually get every once in a while, I'll get emails of people submitting to what they think is the NAACP Crisis
Oh,
Magazine.
so it still is called that. Okay.
Yeah, it's called theirs is called The Crisis Magazine.
Crisis. And
And
I think
so
that is, I did suggest the Crisis. And now that you say that, and I think they said we can't call it the Crisis. And so, yeah, then it
yeah.
ended up being called Crisis.
So now we know the origin of the name, and it's now been revealed to the world. So thank you for your contribution at the beginning. So let's talk about your most recent contribution to Crisis, and that is the article you wrote with Leila Miller called "Catholic Men Rise Up and Fight." So in my head, I've been calling you the two Leilas, but of course I found out that that's mispronouncing your name and pronouncing hers right. So it's Lila and Leila, but spelled the same. And we won't get in a fight who's right.
Both of us have Arabic backgrounds, and to Arabs, I am Leila. My mother was American, my father was Egyptian, and he called me Leila, and all my Egyptian relatives call me Leila, so I do respond to Leila.
Okay, well, there you go. Good to know. But the two of you wrote the article, Catholic Men Rise Up and Fight. And I'll make sure I put a link to this in the show notes so people can go to if they haven't seen it yet, although it got a huge response. So I think a lot of people probably have already read it. But why don't you tell me why it is that the two of you decided to write that article?
Well, we just as we said in the article, we talk about this. We have talked about how frustrated we are that a lot of the times women are the ones who are speaking up. And I mean, I say this as, being married to a man who does speak out
Yes, he
regularly
does.
on a daily basis and does a very good job. And her husband also, she had been lamenting the lack of leadership, and her husband had said, okay, Leila, you say that men should take the lead. Well, you know what? I'm going to do that. And he actually did go ahead and do some of the things that we suggested in the article. And in the key thing really is talking to other men. But for for Leila and for me, being spirited women, but also women who have rejected feminism, and I don't think that those two things are contradictory at all. We have come to realize over the years, and we're both grandmothers, that we cannot do without men. Men have got to be the ones to do the fight. And we'll see, we've noticed, a lot of times you'll point out a problem and the women will respond by saying, I'm going to do something, I'm going to go talk to them, I'm going to write a letter or whatever. And very rarely do we see a woman or hear a woman say, I'm going to pass this along to my husband. And a lot of women have a tendency to respond the way, even we got some comments that were kind of like, well, my husband is kind of introverted. And what we both have been trying to say over the years is that doesn't mean anything. Your husband's personality doesn't mean anything. Your son's personality, the men in your life, men have different personalities, but they're still men. And men are the fighters, the providers, and the protectors. And the role of the woman is, can be to point things out. It can be to be a good sounding board or interlocutor or what have you. We definitely want to be in the conversation. But when the time comes for action, especially when the action required is to call men to be men, only men can do that. And so we were having a conversation and we were just agreeing, this just has to happen. We've had enough. Things are not getting better, they're getting worse. And we just need men to go do what they have to do.
And you see, I always chuckle when I hear sometimes liberals will say something to the effect of how women need a greater role in the church or something like that, because of the fact that most parishes are dominated by women. I mean, it's like almost everything other than the priestly role, everything is run by women in most parishes. And so it's just kind of silly to act like women aren't already involved. But so how should that change in how, like on a parish level, how should that be different in some way?
Oh yeah, I mean, and Leila and I have been saying this as well. I mean, we both, I can't remember when it was, but I mean, on Facebook, we've said this. The huge step is women just need to get out. They need to get out of the sanctuary. They need to get out, and it's so funny. It's so interesting because there are certain trends. And one of them, for instance, might be women realizing it would be wonderful to veil at Mass, but then asking questions like, well, if I'm a lector, should I be veiling? If I'm a Eucharistic minister, should I be veiling? And both of us have said over and over, you should not be a Eucharistic, there should not be Eucharistic ministers, number one. And number two, there should just not be women in the sanctuary. And it's such a clash. The symbolism of veiling clashes with the idea of being in the sanctuary. My husband has a little quip, which he trots out every once in a while, which is, just because you're in the bark of Peter doesn't mean you need to be in the engine room. And I think if we look at it that way, we can see that, I do not want to be down there with all the diesel fumes and the workings and the dials and everything, even if I were an engineer. And, my father was an engineer. I kind of grew up feeling like I might become an engineer. I feel like I have a problem solving mentality, but I do not need to be there. And I think that women don't realize the harm that we have done. So even good Orthodox conservative women fail to make this distinction because we think, well, yes, even Orthodox women will admit, they see that problem that you're talking about. Oh, there's women running everything. And by the way, if it's bad in the parish, it's terrible in the chancery. And Lord only knows what it's like in the Vatican. So I think that the tendency is to say, well, what we need is Orthodox women in these positions. But no, we need Orthodox men, men of service, men with servant hearts to do, not men who are ambitious and power hungry. So it's not just any man, but good men. And women have another role. Women have another important task to carry out in the kingdom. So we need to, sometimes the greatest, most intelligent and courageous thing you can do is to see that something is not your job, and to pull back and to say, I'm going to let the people whose job this is do it. Not because I have any sense of inferiority, but because I have a sense of place, a sense of what is fitting. And women just do not belong in the sanctuary. They do not belong uh, making policies and procedures, even though we might have great contributions and we might have things to say, but at the end of, well, there just shouldn't be so much. The whole bureaucracy, the fact that the parishes and the chanceries are bureaucratic institutions, comes down to this vision, which is such a faulty vision, such a faulty ecclesiology of that this is some sort of administrative enterprise. Yes, a woman can be just as good of an administrator as a man, but that is not what should be going on here. So if everybody gets back to their primary roles, we will see that everything will fall into place.
So okay, I think a lot of people, traditional Catholics, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Catholics, would understand the point about women not in the sanctuary. I mean, I know not all do, but a lot of them do. But fundamentally, like, why can't a woman be the head of the parish council as opposed? Why is that not? I mean, who could maybe, because I think we'd agree that at least skill set wise, a woman could definitely have the skills necessary to do that job well. But
Yeah.
why fundamentally would it be better for a man to be in that type of position, aside from the fact that a lot of times these, like you said, are just become bureaucratic nightmares. But why and if not, if they shouldn't be there, what should a woman's role be in parish life?
So, well, that's a question that has a lot of assumptions in it. I mean, just starting with the parish council, I mean, the whole and parish life, like what is it that we mean by that? If we see the parish as a worship center where activities go on and where people are flocking in order to do um, things that are not directly related to the sacramental life, then we can see how a lot of paperwork, a lot of administration will be involved. And then it becomes hard to see why it shouldn't be just like, oh, the best people at this administrative type work should be doing it. But is that what parish life is? I would say if we look at it as the parish, I mean, somebody once, when I think I was on Twitter and this is a few years ago, and I was saying, like all of this needs to go. All of these activities, ministries, quote unquote, even the CCD programs, everything just needs to go. And the person who was interacting with me said, well, what would there be then? Just sacraments? And I was kind of like, well, yes, that is what it would be. And if you think about, what parish life was back before things kind of went downhill, and I'm not even, trying to say everything was hunky dory, but everything was very much related to the sacraments, and then also parish life was the schools. Now notice that schools and parishes, for most parishes, that is just not even on the charts. There isn't a school, and there are a few, I realize that, but the life of the parish had been sacramental, and then the education, and the education being run by religious orders. And now we have something very different. So yes, if what we're positing is this very different thing, and honestly, I think a book could be written about this, so I won't spend too much time on it. But if we are pausing that, then yes, it becomes difficult to understand why women shouldn't be a part of it. But if we think to ourselves instead, we are seeing that things are getting stripped down, and that we will be that more purified, smaller church that Pope Benedict spoke of. I think that maybe we could get a glimmer that whether it's the parish council or what have you, that the men need to keep the clergy on task. And the task is a very particular, precisely defined thing. And women also have a particular indispensable thing to do, but it's not in the building of the church. It is in the home and is in the community. And if what we can see, we're losing everything. We're losing the church and we're losing our homes. We're literally losing. Neighborhoods are empty. There's nobody there. Even in the pandemic, okay, now everybody's in their neighborhoods, but they're just in their basement on their Zoom. We don't have communities. And so we need to really see that we're in a very particular watershed moment, and to reclaim our roles as they are laid out in our natures is going to be crucial to figuring out how to move forward.
Yeah, boy, you're really preaching to the choir here, because one of the big things I've long held is that fundamentally how parishes are run is just fatally flawed, and it just is. And I in my upcoming book, I don't talk about this in like as the whole book, but one of the things I really talk about a lot is the fact that if you look at how parishes were run before, you had these men's groups that would have these they'd have processions they'd run, they'd have these devotions they would do, the women would have their group for devotions and things like that. And it was all though geared towards either the sacraments or devotional life. And just all the extra things that we add on there, like you said, are mostly bureaucratic, are just, they just end up being worthless. But I think I never thought of the point that you just made, which was that leads to the way it's set up now, then leads to the question of why can't women do these things? Because they are just strictly almost secular administrative tasks. So who cares who does them?
Right.
Whereas if it's if it's somebody trying to push the priest to do their to lead people to Christ, that is a more manly a man's task more than a woman. So
it need to be way more busy in their lives. I mean, I read a biography of Blessed or Saint Solanus Casey.
right.
He's a saint, right?
I think he's blessed. Yeah.
Blessed, yeah. And just in the course of telling his story, they're telling about what the life was like, and this is in the Chicago area in the Depression. And we are talking about families. I mean, families with numerous children, with not much money, living their lives, working hard. There's not time to create a bunch of programs. By the way, most of the programs that you have in the most active parishes, most of the programs are particularly aimed at recovering lost Catholics. So instead, how about we raise children to remain Catholic? And then the other part of it, the other part of the activity that was going on was taking care of the poor. And so yeah, like you're saying, parish life was sacramental or devotional, but it was also educational. So you had the religious who ran the schools. Huge. You want to talk about evangelism? There is nothing, no undertaking that one could imagine that is more evangelical than a Catholic school. And yet the archbishops have abandoned, they have completely abandoned it. And they have abandoned the religious orders that would provide those. Anyway, so you had schools, and then you had taking care of the poor. And Casey, was, in his order, that's what they did. And the people saw their role as scrimping and saving their $5 to give to him and to the other brothers so that they could have a soup kitchen and feed. And I'm sure the women, helped take care of that. And then the men probably cleaned up and everything. But everybody, honestly, everybody was so busy so busy just doing the things that Christians should do that they didn't have time to create mischief. And that's what we have now is we just have a lot of mischief of women coming up with more and more ideas of what father could be doing and telling him what to do. And the man doesn't have a chance to, and plus he's been in a seminary that's extremely effeminate. And we linked to a very good article in the crisis article. I don't know if you remember that article, had a chance to reread it, but a very important article Father Mason wrote about the forgotten vice in seminaries, which is the
Right.
effeminacy. So you have priests who are not well formed. Most of our younger priests today, sadly, are from homes that are not, they are broken homes. So they themselves, their understanding is very intellectual. It is not that visceral, just completely organic understanding of what a family should be and how to help families. And I know as a child of divorce, until I had my family and they were older, I myself did not know how to help people who were in trouble. I had all I could do just to get through what I needed to get through and do what I had to do. There's no energy left over. And that's the sad brokenness of the chain that we really need. So how to recover that? We just have to go back to the basics of the sacraments and to see parish life as much more centered, centered on sacraments. And that providing the sacraments is what the clergy does, and the clergy are male. And so they need supportive men,
Right.
and men need to call them to account. Men talking to men. That's just how it has to be. And the woman's role is the role that's why we had, Leila was saying to me, something about like, oh, these long Bible quotes, but the truth is that the mother of the Maccabees is just a wonderful example for women, because and she is, they are in scripture, in sacred scripture, for us to ponder that she is so strong. Scripture says she joined manly emotion with womanly reason, which I think is such an interesting, not completely, predictable way of putting it. Manly emotion with womanly reason to exhort her sons to go and die. And I think she's our model. Like, just go and die. We're be here behind you, and we will meet you in heaven. And that's basically our role, not to be the ones. A lot of the commentators said, women said, well, I've written to the bishop, I've talked to the bishop. And it's like, yeah, I have too. And then we're done.
I one thing I know, I was just reading an article about a number of these priests that have kicked out people who aren't wearing masks at mass or called the police on them. And I've noticed that they all seem to be women who are getting kicked out. And first of all, it's like, are you going after the weaker person? I mean, because like my wife, she doesn't wear one when she goes out, and sometimes somebody will stop her. But my son, who's this big, tall, 17-year-old boy, he's like, oh, I'll walk with her and they won't say anything. And they won't. And so, but I also think, what about where are the men around when this happens? Like when the priest comes to this, like I remember this one was like a pregnant or breastfeeding. I can't remember what it was, a pregnant woman in Dallas, I think. And the priest said, you called the police on her. Where are the men in the parish to say, Father, no, you can't do this. This is wrong. It sounds like not one person stepped up and confronted him.
Nobody said anything. And that is truly an indictment of the manly spirit. And this is the thing is, whether it's like actually hormones in the water, or whether it's education, or what it is, certainly women, this is a conversation, I'm sure you've had this conversation with your wife, but my husband had this conversation with me when our children were little, where he was like, our kids will get bullied, and I'm going to teach our sons that they have to fight. And of course, moms don't want their sons to fight. You have to, do what the teachers tell you not to fight. It's wrong to fight. And so, it's like, really, that just seems like that's not the way to solve conflict. I mean, this is the very female, we have our view of how to solve conflict, and that's fine. And we have our say, and we have, we are complementary to men, and so men do need to hear. However, the man has his experience, and as the boy on the playground who probably did get pushed around a little bit, you learn that if you stand up to the bully, then the bully will leave you alone. And then you also have to protect the other kids, and you have to be willing to stand up to the bully for the sake of the others, even though you aren't as big as the bully. That's what it means to learn as a boy to become a man. This is what I learned from my husband. I have a friend um, whose mother, she raised five daughters and him. And one time he was doing his paper route. She was at the door and she could see him out there with the paper, and the bully came by and knocked over his bike. And she yelled to him from the door, like, Rick, go fight him. And I know that she learned that from her husband. She learned it from her father, because it's not normal for the woman's first reaction is not that. And unfortunately, I mean, we've gotten distracted because we're really distracted right now by COVID, but up until recently, we had started to make great strides on realizing that over the decades, we have emasculated boys in school, and that we need to do a little remedial work on that and try to recover, instead of um, medicating our boys, which is a terrible scandal. And, you know, we should do something about that. And so many of us started homeschooling so we wouldn't even have to deal with that. But now instead of saying, well, fighting somebody who says we should give our sons medication, we are, on the contrary, sitting in the basement saying, oh no, you have to sit in front of the screen another hour.
Right.
We've lost it completely. And this fear that has been put into us by this COVID thing has contributed to the masculization. So that is why it's ever more important for men to stand up. We are losing everything. The churches are going to completely close. Some of them have opened somewhat, but this is temporary. Once the state gets power, it's not going to give it up. So
It never has in history. So unless
no,
it's taken away from them. I know I read somewhere, I can't remember where it was, but somebody saying how, fathers, when their boys are little, they should be wrestling with them, throwing them up, stuff like that. And the mom will probably stand there and say, no, don't do that. That's dangerous, whatever. And this it was a good psychologist, I can't remember, but he said something like, you should completely ignore your wife in that situation and throw that kid up and fight with them and do all the things, because that's good for them. And it teaches them, how to be a man at a very early age. But yeah, like you said, standing up to bullies, because what they're taught now is, if somebody's doing that, you're supposed to run to the teacher and tell on them. And if you get involved and try to stop him physically, you're now a problem. Even though it was the bully who started everything and you're standing up to him, you're part of the problem for standing up for the little guy.
right. And women have to learn that our role is to say, honey, that might be dangerous, but it is also then to step aside. And I mean, how about even when you have, like, when my youngest was born, my son was eldest was 16, and so when he was about 17 or 18, he's tossing her and her next older brother up in the air, and I mean tossed so hard that the kid hit their head on the ceiling. And the part of the mom's role is to kind of be like,
Yeah,
well, I guess he got a bonk on the head,
you're
like,
right. I'll patch it up.
yeah, and just like, we have to learn to live with each other better. And it can't be that men are always giving way to women. Part of what we were trying to say in that article is, women, you also have to give way to men, and you have to say, this might not be the way I think you should do this. This might not be how I would have said this, but I honor the fact that you are the provider and the protector, and I will just let you do. And a huge part of our lives together as men and women is letting each other be who we are. And women have failed. We have failed to do that. Men let women be women, but women do not let men be men. Part of it is that, I will say this, Part of it is that men are a little lazy. The flip side to being very um, spirited and being out there fighting and everything, the flip side or the negative side is being a little lazy. And so, I think that and it's a feminacy to say, well, women are going to run things. Oh, well,
Right.
I'll just go to my man cave, pop a beer, and it'll all be great. So men have to fight that and be willing to say to their women folk, I see what you're saying, but this is how we're going to do it. And then women have to be will to see what's at stake and to say, you know what, our way has not worked, and we need to let them deal with this.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier that you say you're not a feminist. And so I want to talk a little bit about feminism. Um, I mean, boy, there's a lot to talk about with that, I know.
Yes,
But
yes.
like, what would you say is, obviously you're not a feminist, and so you think it's a negative influence. Well, how would you say feminism has impacted specifically the church over the past, 50 years? I mean, because it really came to the fore in the 1960s and whatnot. How has it impacted the life of the church? Other than, I mean, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but specifically like the feminist movement.
Well, I mean, like you said, I think it's complex, and it has to do with the simultaneous decision for reasons that I don't know completely what they are. And I think they probably go deeper and are much more nefarious than we think, of the hierarchy to accept certain modernistic approaches, to let go of tradition. And, that comes at the same time that of as feminism and in the secular world. And yet I also think that feminism in the secular world is a result of, not a cause of, but a result of a certain abdication on the part of Catholics. And the evidence for this is that Pius XI, in his encyclical Casti Connubii, which was written in 1930, was a response to the the attacks on the family. And I think he saw very clearly what was um the totalitarian instinct. And of course, totalitarianism in its socialist form will always attack the relationship between men and women and attack the family. And he saw that, and he warned about it, and he very eloquently expressed what the man and the woman's role vis-a-vis each other is. And I think that because his warnings were not heeded, I think that that in turn fueled the bitterness and um, the rebellion. And it's so interesting, really, I mean, Margaret Sanger was a huge factor, and she wrote a response to Casti Connubii. I don't know if people
I
are
didn't
all
know
aware
that.
of that, but she did write a response to it, and it's just a manifesto of the bitter anti-life mentality and seeing everything in terms of power. And one thing I think that is very interesting, and it's hard for conservatives to accept, is that Humanae Vitae, while it did hold the line on the important doctrinal point that contraception could never be accepted, it contains in itself rhetoric and an idea that undermines its message, and that is that women have a new place. Women have a new place in society in our day. But how can this be? How can it be that, God created man and woman, and he created us to relate to each other in a specific nuptial way. And as Pius XI shows so beautifully in Casti Connubii, he founded the entire self sanctification of the world, of the created world, on the work of the family. So how can it be that in a certain age, suddenly those relationships won't be as important, and there will be some other relationship that the woman will what's implicit in his words are that the woman now will turn from that and take her place in the larger world, i.e., be just more like a man.
Right.
And I think that that actually planted a seed that has borne a bitter fruit, and it has made Catholic women, it has emasculated Catholic men, and it has made Catholic women think that our nature and our bodies and our motherhood are all problems as opposed to gifts and perfections. And that has had an incredibly detrimental effect on our life together. And it has made it so that there just are not children. There are not children the way there ought to be. And this is, how can you have life without children? There have to be children. You go, even when you see pictures of churches, oh, this church is open, and then there will be a picture of it, and it's like, it's all old people. Only in the traditional Latin mass do you see pictures of families, you know children are, but usually there aren't that many pictures because
Yeah.
usually they try not to. But even those pictures that were going around when that gal was taken out, or she went out with the police because she was not wearing a mask. And I really do think she was targeted because she was holding a baby and she was young. And her husband was there too. But if you see the pictures that went along with that, and you see the other picture that was of the like vaccinated, that one that had the sign, people with the vaccine on this
Oh
side and
yeah.
people who weren't vaccinated on that side, that parish was in Florida. And if you can see the backs of people's heads, they're all really old. When you look at Father James Martin will post a picture of himself giving a talk to people with the hidden truth that people do not often acknowledge is, but you can see it if you look at the picture.
Right. I cut off there for a second on my end. So, um, now I know there's a movement, there has been a movement for years about like a Catholic feminism, that a lot of people embrace this idea that you can be a Catholic and a feminist, and they'll kind of change a little bit, I guess, they'll distinguish themselves, I should say, from like radical feminists, secular feminists. Do you think there is such a thing as Catholic feminism? Is that legitimate or not?
No, it's absolutely not legitimate. First of all, what is so important about this word feminism? Feminism is responsible for the death of and many world wars over of babies, heaps and mountains of babies, all dead because of feminism. I can't imagine somebody saying, I'm a new Nazi. I'm a, I'm a Catholic Nazi. Like, no, National Socialism has some good things behind it. Like, let me explain to you how National Socialism can really help us in our age. Like, no, that you have to reject it. It's an ideology, and how anyone wants to reclaim this idea that has only resulted in, and nobody will, it's that fallacy, the no true SCOTUS fallacy, that well, those aren't really feminists. Well, I'm sorry, every time you find a feminist, you find someone who at the end of the day thinks that a woman's body is her own and that she should not be defined by the fact that she is made to be a mother. And this includes, before somebody says this includes the religious, because the for women religious, being spiritual mothers is is intimately identified with their vocation. So first, that's the first thing, is I don't understand why it's so important to cling to this word feminism. And then, but it's not just semantic, because what feminism is it's the ideology of equality. But Christianity is inimical to the ideology of equality. Jesus Christ did not deem equality something to be grasped at. He emptied himself. He was God. He was Lord of the universe. He is God. And he emptied himself of that to come and live as a man among men and to be part of the hierarchy of being and to submit and while being the king of the universe. So in what way can it be possibly part of Catholicism to insist on an ideology of equality? And the thing is that equality is never going to be a concept that can be nailed down or grasped when speaking of the sexes, because the sexes are different. And the difference always comes down to that men are fathers and they do and they act and they fight and they um, build, and women are mothers and women nurture and take care of babies and take care of souls and make a place and make a home. And if you try to force an equality between these two perfections, you lose what each one has. And why would a Catholic want to do that? This is how God made us. And the first words he uttered to the man and the woman were, male and female. He created them. Those are the things we know. And so I do not understand the clinging to this ideology. When you start to dig deeper, you find a lot of things that are never answered. The pivots go so fast that the person you're talking to will end up spinning, because nobody ever explains how we're going to live with each other on a Christian basis, which is dying to self and living for the other person, if we're always demanding equality for ourselves. And how, at the end of the day, marriage is simply, we know as Catholics that marriage is for the purpose of procreation. But no feminist can ever explain who is going to raise the children. No feminist, and many Catholic men are feminists also, and they will never explain that. And they will never explain the reality that when the mother doesn't raise her own children, it's another woman who raises those children.
Mm.
And where's the justice in that? In fact, feminism requires that some women don't get homes of their own and don't get to be mothers of their own children because they are necessary to the raising and the keeping of the home of those feminist women. And so really feminism is an elitist, um, it's almost like a grift, because it's a way that the elites get what they want and to prevent poor people from having what they deserve. And it should be that poor and rich people just all have families. Some are richer and some are poorer, but everyone basically raises their own children and takes care of their own homes. All the women take care of their own homes while the men go and provide and protect their homes. And naturally, some people will always be richer and some people will always be poorer. And so some people get more help than others. But in a Christian society, we're all there to help each other. And this is what's been taken away from us by these so-called Catholic feminists.
Wait, well, I want to make sure before we go here, I want to talk about your upcoming. How can you have so many upcoming books is what I want to know. Because you have both a 3-volume work and another book coming out. So first, the 3-volume work, the Summa Domestica, is that right?
Yes.
And what's that about?
So that is the reason that these books are there is because they've all taken so long. So the Summa Domestica is um, so my blog, that Like Mother, Like Daughter, which I've written about the questions of just making a home, educating children, taking care of the house, disciplining children, all of these things on my blog for 12 years or so. Finally, over the past 5 years, I've been trying to wrestle these things into, an actual book that people could read. So it does end up being 3 volumes. And because I also am committed to being devoted to my family and not, this is not my business or or anything. Like, I'm not a professional, so I keep on like having a grandchild and having to run out and whatever, but or like trying to put my family first. So definitely has taken a long time, but finally it is now at the typesetter. So we're hoping for that,
And
and it'll be 3 volumes. Yeah.
so when do you think that's going to be out?
So I don't know. I hope for the summer. That would be great.
Are
So
all 3 volumes coming out at the same time?
yes,
Okay.
and they'll be in a nice slipcover, and they will be good for gift giving, and
Awesome.
they will be illustrated by my daughter Deirdre
Oh,
Folly.
neat.
So yep. So
Who's
that's
publishing that?
Sophia Institute.
Sophia Institute. Oh, great. Well,
Yeah.
that sounds like a great one. I think that's a honestly, I think that sounds like a great one, especially for like a newly married couple, like to give to the new wife and everything. I mean both could read it, but obviously I think that sounds like a great gift idea in that situation.
And my whole idea is that a lot of women think they're feminists because they just don't feel competent in the areas of taking care of the home, and they don't feel um, that they can educate their children. But so what I've tried to do in the blog is really say, if you gain competence, and that doesn't mean perfection, but if you're just competent, and I certainly am just barely competent, then then you will find joy in making a home. And even the spirited, intellectual, intelligent woman finds joy and in making a home in solidarity with the others, so that they're not consigning them to kind of a miserable existence. So that's that book, with a lot of practical things in it, as have I've been writing about on the blog for all these years.
That's great. And then so then the other one is God, was it God Has No Grandchildren? And so
Right.
what's that one about?
So on the blog, I had done a guided reading of Casti Connubii, Pius XI's encyclical, and I put those into those book. So those posts, I edited them, and it became um, an ebook that I published on Kindle. And it just never was something that I could get anyone to publish, as a real life book. But I thought, well, at least they'll be available on Kindle. And then the publisher of Aruka Press and Professor Peter Kwasniewski really encouraged me. They said, no, because Peter had said to me, so did you ever write anything about Casti? Could you have anything written about Casti Connubii that I could give? So I said, oh, do I have something? I do. So, and I told him, and on top of this guided reading, I also wrote this quite long article that when Amoris Laetitia came out, I realized that there is a paragraph in Casti Connubii that bears on Amoris Laetitia, and that actually Amoris Laetitia contradicts.
Mm.
And so I wrote a very long article going through it, and nobody wanted to publish that article because it was too long. So I sent all of that to him, and he said, this all has to be published. My friend at Aruka Press, I'm going to send it to him. And he was like, this is super exciting because, this is the year of Amoris Laetitia. So this is the year to have this be published. So it's the second edition, and it will be published in softcover and hardcover, and it will have the encyclical bound into it so
Oh,
that
good.
as you're studying it, it's there. And then it will also have this extra material that I wrote, that goes through the bit in Amoris Laetitia, which is not the bit that the Dubia Cardinals, it's the bit that comes right before that directly goes against what is taught in Casti Connubii. So,
So when will that when's that one coming out?
yes, very soon,
Very
hopefully
soon.
in the coming month. Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's going to be great. I mentioned to you already, my high school son, he's doing a paper on Casti Connubii. And what he's doing is he's using it to compare the church's view on artificial contraception with Planned Parenthood's view. And so he had to, I told him, I said, rinse yourself off with holy water when you go after you find out what Planned Parenthood says about it all.
It might be interesting to see that, that, as I mentioned, that old, what's her name there, um, did write
Yeah, Margaret Sanger.
Margaret Sanger did write the response, which is
That's
chilling.
fascinating.
really chilling. Yeah.
Is that available online, her response, do you think? Okay, I'm going to look that up because I had not heard that before until you just said that. So that's good to know. Okay, well, I think we're going to end it there because we could just talk forever, I know. Where's the best place people can find you? Your blog, like Mother Like Daughter?
Like motherlikedaughter.org. I also have another little spin-off blog called Happy Despite Them, which is a blogspot blog, which is linked on like Mother Like Daughter, so you can
Okay.
find me there.
And I'll put
And
links to this on the show notes as well.
and then the books are available on Amazon, and the Little Oratory and the Summa Domestica are Sophia Institute, so
Okay.
they can be gotten there too. And
Right. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Leila. And I really appreciate the article that you wrote for Crisis. I think it generated a lot of discussion. I think it was really good. So
I appreciate you publishing it. Thank you so much.
of course. Yeah. Well, great. Well, and you have a new grandchild coming soon. So everybody who's watching this, we don't know when, but everybody say a prayer that everything goes well. I think that would be great. So, okay. Well, thank you everybody for listening and watching. And until next time, see you later.